She only wanted to create a better life for her daughter by fixing up the dilapidated barn behind their modest farmhouse. But what Rebecca Collins discovered beneath the rotting floorboards would shock military historians, mobilize Pentagon officials, and rewrite a dangerous chapter of American history that some powerful people hoped would stay buried forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Collins checked her bank account balance for the third time that morning, hoping that somehow the numbers might have magically increased since she last looked. They hadn't. The 1,243. 87 dollars in her checking account represented months of careful saving from her two jobs: mornings at the Pinecrest Community Center helping seniors and evenings waitressing at the Woodland Diner on the outskirts of town. Every extra dollar she could spare went into what she called her barn fund, a dream that most of her friends and family considered foolish at best. "Mom, the bus is going to be here in 5 minutes," Mia called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the slight edge of a preteen who was perpetually worried about being late. At 12 years old, Mia Collins was already showing signs of the organized, determined woman she would someday become, a trait she had undoubtedly inherited from her mother. "Coming, sweetie." Rebecca quickly closed her laptop and grabbed her worn denim jacket from the back of her chair. The early October morning carried a distinct chill that hinted at the Pennsylvania winter that would arrive all too soon. Their small farmhouse sat on 3 acres of land on the outskirts of Pinecrest, a town of just over 2,000 people that had seen better days. Like many Western Pennsylvania communities, Pinecrest had been slowly declining since the manufacturing jobs started disappearing in the 1990s. The Collins home wasn't much, a modest 2-bedroom structure with plumbing that complained loudly every winter, and windows that leaked cold air despite Rebecca's best efforts with weather stripping and plastic sheeting. But it was theirs, purchased at foreclosure last year after a decade of apartment living in Pittsburgh, their first real home. And then there was the barn. Standing 70 yards behind the house, the large red structure had clearly seen better days. Built in 1958, according to the faded date carved above its massive doors, the barn had been the main selling point for Rebecca, though the real estate agent had considered it a liability rather than an asset. "You'll probably need to tear it down," he had warned as they toured the property. "Could collapse any day." But where others saw a dangerous eyesore, Rebecca saw possibility. The spacious interior could be converted into a workshop for her small furniture restoration business. Currently crammed into their garage, with more space, she could take on larger projects, maybe even hire help eventually. It represented financial independence, a chance to quit at least one of her jobs, and more time with Mia during these critical years. "Your grandfather would think you're crazy," her mother had told her on the phone last week, "fixing up an old barn instead of saving for Mia's college." The comment had stung, as her mother's observations often did. But Rebecca had simply replied, "This barn is for Mia's college," and changed the subject. After seeing Mia safely onto the school bus, Rebecca walked back to the house, her eyes drawn as always to the barn that loomed in the background. Today was the day. She had finally saved enough to begin the renovation in earnest, starting with replacing the rotting floorboards that made even walking inside a treacherous proposition. Frank Henderson, her 75-year-old neighbor, and the only person who seemed to believe in her vision, had offered to help. His pickup truck appeared at the end of her driveway right on time. "Morning, Becky," Frank called as he climbed out of his truck with surprising agility for a man his age. A retired postal worker with a perpetual tan and hands roughened by decades of work, Frank had taken an almost grandfatherly interest in Rebecca and Mia since they'd moved in. Ready to turn that death trap into something useful. Rebecca smiled, grateful for his enthusiasm. More than ready. The lumber was delivered yesterday. Well then, Frank said, retrieving his tool belt from the truck bed, let's get to it. Before I remember, I'm supposed to be too old for this kind of work. They spent the morning carefully removing the most damaged floorboards near the barn's eastern wall. The work was slow and methodical, with Frank insisting they create proper support structures before removing any load-bearing elements. No sense in having the whole thing collapse on our heads, he noted dryly. Wouldn't be much of a workshop then. By early afternoon, they had cleared a 12 by 15-foot section down to the earth below. Rebecca was shoveling away years of accumulated dirt and debris when her tool struck something with a dull metallic clang. Hit a rock? Frank asked, looking up from where he was measuring a replacement beam. Rebecca shook her head, dropping to her knees and brushing away dirt with her gloved hands. I don't think so. Sounds metallic. As she cleared more soil, a flat metal surface began to emerge. Frank, there's something here. Frank joined her, his curiosity piqued. Together they excavated around what appeared to be some kind of metal. At your door, approximately 3 feet square, embedded in the ground beneath where the floorboards had been. What in the world? Rebecca murmured, brushing away the last of the dirt to reveal a heavy steel handle and what looked like a combination lock, now green with corrosion. Frank knelt beside her, his expression suddenly serious. I've seen hatches like this before, he said quietly, during my time in Germany. Your military service? Rebecca knew Frank had served in the army during the early 1970s, but he rarely spoke about it. He nodded. This looks like an access point to a Cold War bunker or storage facility, but why would there be one here, under a private barn in Pinecrest? Could it be some kind of root cellar? Rebecca suggested. The realtor mentioned the previous owner was a bit of a doomsday prepper. Frank shook his head. Military grade, if I'm not mistaken. He ran his fingers along the edge of the hatch, and this lock, it's a high-security model from that era. No ordinary civilian would have access to something like this. Rebecca sat back on her heels, staring at the mysterious hatch. Her barn, renovation project, had suddenly become something else entirely. Should we try to open it? Frank considered this for a moment. The lock's corroded beyond use. We'd need to cut it. He glanced at her. It's your property, Becky. Your call. Rebecca thought about the potential danger, but curiosity won out. Let's open it. Frank returned to his truck for an angle grinder. After several minutes of careful work, the ancient lock surrendered with a reluctant snap. The hatch, however, refused to budge, sealed shut by decades of soil compression and rust. Need something for leverage, Frank muttered, disappearing again and returning with a sturdy pry bar. After positioning it carefully along the hatch's edge, he applied steady pressure. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding protest of metal against metal, the hatch lifted half an inch. I think we've got it, Frank said, adjusting his grip on the pry bar. Stand back a bit, just in case. With a tremendous effort, he forced the hatch open the rest of the way, revealing a dark opening and a set of metal rungs leading downward. A rush of stale, cool air flowed upward, carrying a musty scent of paper and metal. Rebecca and Frank exchanged glances. We should call someone, she said hesitantly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe the police. Hold on, Frank replied, pulling a heavy flashlight from his tool belt. He shone it down the opening, revealing a narrow shaft about 12 feet deep, ending in what appeared to be a concrete floor. Looks secure enough. Concrete walls, metal ladder, some kind of underground room. Rebecca's mind raced with possibilities. An old fallout shelter, perhaps. But why hidden beneath a barn, and why secured with military-grade locks? I'm going down, she decided, surprising herself with her boldness. Becky, we don't know what's down there or how stable it is after all these years. It's my property, Frank, and whatever's down there might explain why this hatch was hidden under my barn. She reached for his flashlight. I'll just take a quick look. If anything seems dangerous, I'll come right back up. Frank reluctantly handed over the flashlight. Be careful. I'll keep watch up here. Any sign of trouble, you call out immediately, you hear? Rebecca nodded, positioning herself at the opening. The metal rung seemed solid enough, though coated with decades of dust. She descended carefully, the beam of the flashlight illuminating her way. The air grew cooler as she went deeper, carrying that strange, sterile smell she couldn't quite place. When her feet touched the concrete floor, she turned and shone the light around, revealing a space much larger than she had anticipated. It wasn't just a small shelter or storage area. It was a fully constructed underground room, perhaps 20 feet square, with metal shelving along all four walls and a center table bolted to the floor. Frank, she called up, it's some kind of underground room. Looks secure, I'm going to look around. Be quick about it, came his concerned reply from above. Rebecca approached the nearest set of shelves. They held dozens of metal document boxes, each labeled with codes and dates ranging from 1958 to 1964. Opening one revealed folders filled with papers, many stamped with classified or top secret in bold red letters. What on earth? She whispered, carefully leafing through documents containing technical diagrams, coordinates, and typewritten reports. The language was dense with military jargon she didn't understand, but certain phrases jumped out. Missile deployment, first strike, capability, Soviet response protocols. The center table held what appeared to be maps, detailed topographical representations of western Pennsylvania with locations marked by red circles and annotations. With growing amazement, Rebecca realized she was standing in what appeared to be some kind of Cold War-era intelligence archive. She moved to another shelf and found more document boxes, along with sealed equipment cases. One had partially opened over time, revealing photographic equipment that looked decades old but remarkably sophisticated. Another contained what looked like radio components. "Frank!" she called up again, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete chamber. "You need to see this. I think I've found some kind of, I don't know, secret government facility or something." "What kind of documents?" Frank called back, his voice tinged with both concern and curiosity. "Military, I think. Cold War stuff, maps, reports, all classified." A long silence followed. Then, "I'm coming down." Despite his age, Frank navigated the ladder with practiced ease. When he reached the bottom, Rebecca handed him a folder she'd been examining. "Look at this. It mentions something called Operation Timberwolf. Mean anything to you?" Frank's expression grew increasingly grave as he flipped through the pages. "This is serious, Becky. Really serious. These are strategic defense documents from the height of the Cold War." He looked around the room with new understanding. This isn't just a random storage facility. This is an intelligence dead drop, a secure location for exchanging sensitive information. Rebecca struggled to process what she was hearing. But why here, under a barn in the middle of nowhere? "That's exactly why," Frank explained. "The most secure locations are often the most innocuous, a barn on private property away from prying eyes." He trailed off, turning slowly to survey the room again. The question is, who knew this was here, and why was it abandoned with all this still inside? As they continued exploring, the scale of the discovery became increasingly apparent. The underground room contained not just documents, but also communication equipment, surveillance tools, and what Frank identified as encryption devices. all dating from the late 1950s and early 1960s. "Becky," Frank said finally, his voice unusually solemn, "we need to report this. This isn't the kind of thing private citizens should be handling." Rebecca nodded, her renovation plans temporarily forgotten in the face of this extraordinary discovery. "Who do we even call about something like this? The police?" Frank shook his head. "For this, we go straight to the military. I still have a few contacts from my service days. Let me make some calls." They carefully replaced everything exactly as they'd found it, climbed back up the ladder, and secured the hatch as best they could. Back in Rebecca's kitchen, Frank made several phone calls, speaking in the clipped, formal manner of someone reverting to military protocol. Rebecca caught fragments. Classified materials, Cold War era, secure containment required, but most of it was purposefully vague. After the final call, Frank set down his phone with a sigh. "Well, someone's coming tomorrow morning. They were very interested." "Who exactly?" Rebecca asked, suddenly nervous about what she had stumbled into. "Pentagon officials. Intelligence division." Frank's expression was apologetic. "I know this throws a wrench in your renovation plans, but there's no way around it. This is national security stuff, Becky." Rebecca slept poorly that night, her mind racing with questions about what lay beneath her barn. Had the previous owner known? Was that why the property had been so surprisingly affordable? The real estate disclosure forms had mentioned nothing about underground structures or military installations. Mia, thankfully, had accepted the explanation that they'd found some old historical things under the barn that experts needed to look at. Rebecca had decided to keep the full truth from her daughter until she understood more herself. The following morning, after sending Mia off to school, Rebecca was surprised to see not the intimidating government convoy she had imagined, but rather a single black SUV pulling into her driveway. Two people emerged, a woman in an impeccable military uniform adorned with the insignia of a colonel, and a middle-aged man in a tweed jacket who looked more like a university professor than a Pentagon official. Frank, who had arrived early to provide moral support, went out to meet them. Rebecca followed, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Ms. Collins," the woman extended her hand. "Colonel Diana Martinez, Pentagon Intelligence Historical Division. This is Dr. Harold Wilson from the National Security Archives. Thank you for reporting your discovery responsibly." Rebecca shook their hands, noting the firm, professional grip of Colonel Martinez and the more hesitant touch of Dr. Wilson. Of course, it seemed, well, important. "More than you know," Colonel Martinez replied, her expression serious, but not unfriendly. "Mr. Henderson briefed us somewhat, but we'd appreciate seeing firsthand what you found." Rebecca led them to the barn, explaining her renovation project and how they had stumbled upon the hatch. As they approached the now exposed opening, Dr. Wilson became visibly excited. "This matches the description exactly," he murmured, kneeling to examine the hatch. The schematics indicated a rural location in western Pennsylvania, but the specific coordinates were redacted in all the files we've recovered. Colonel Martinez nodded. "We've been looking for this facility for almost a decade." "You knew this was here?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "Not here specifically," the colonel clarified. "We knew facilities like this existed, part of Operation Timber Wolf, but many of the records were deliberately destroyed in 1968 during a reorganization of intelligence services. Some were concerned about public reaction if the full scope of domestic surveillance operations became known." The four descended into the underground chamber, Colonel Martinez and Dr. Wilson handling the documents and equipment with reverential care, documenting everything with photographs and careful notes. "This is remarkable," Dr. Wilson kept saying. his initial reserve replaced by scholarly enthusiasm, the most complete field intelligence archive I've ever seen from this period, and in near-perfect condition. Colonel Martinez was more measured in her reactions, but even she couldn't conceal her interest in certain documents, particularly those relating to something called Protocol Avalanche. After nearly 2 hours of examination, they gathered back in Rebecca's kitchen. The Colonel placed a thin folder on the table. "Ms. Collins, I need to explain what you've discovered and what it means." Her tone was formal but not unkind. During the height of the Cold War, the United States established a network of covert intelligence outposts throughout key strategic regions. This area was particularly important due to its proximity to several military installations and defense manufacturing facilities. Dr. Wilson picked up the explanation. "What makes your discovery unique is that this wasn't just any outpost. It was a pivot point, a place where critical information about Soviet activities was collected, analyzed, and disseminated to military command." "But why under my barn?" Rebecca asked. "Who built this place?" The property was purchased by the government through a shell corporation in 1957, Colonel Martinez explained. "The barn was built specifically to conceal the facility. When operations ceased in 1964, the property was eventually sold off, with its history deliberately obscured." Frank, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "And the documents? Why weren't they removed or destroyed?" Colonel Martinez and Dr. Wilson exchanged glances. "That's the most sensitive aspect of all this," the Colonel said carefully. "Based on what we've seen today, it appears this facility was abandoned in haste. The normal decommissioning protocols weren't followed. Which is why this discovery is so significant," Dr. Wilson added. "These documents provide crucial missing pieces in our understanding of Cold War intelligence operations, particularly regarding how close we came to nuclear conflict during certain crisis points." Rebecca tried to process what she was hearing. "So what happens now? Do you take everything away? Is my property going to be seized or something?" "Nothing so dramatic," Colonel Martinez assured her. "We'll need to remove the classified materials and equipment, of course. But we have no intention of interfering with your property rights. In fact," she glanced at Dr. Wilson, who nodded encouragingly, "the government would like to compensate you for your cooperation in this matter." Rebecca stared at Colonel Martinez, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Compensate me? What exactly does that mean?" "The documents you've discovered are of significant historical value," Colonel Martinez explained, her tone measured but sincere. "While I can't discuss specific amounts right now, the Pentagon has protocols for situations like this, rare as they are. We would provide financial compensation for the inconvenience and for your discretion regarding certain aspects of what you found." Dr. Wilson nodded enthusiastically. "Some of these documents will completely reshape our understanding of Cold War intelligence operations. The historical value alone is immeasurable." Rebecca's mind raced. Compensation could mean finishing the barn renovation properly, maybe even setting aside money for Mia's college fund. But something about this didn't feel right. "What's the catch? Are you asking me to keep quiet about finding a secret government facility under my barn?" "Not entirely," Colonel Martinez replied. "The facility's existence isn't classified. It's been nearly 60 years after all. But some of the operational details, and particularly the contents of certain documents, would need to remain confidential for national security reasons." Frank, who had been quietly observing the conversation, cleared his throat. "If I may, Colonel, I served in Army intelligence in the early 70s. I understand operational security concerns, but Becky deserves to know exactly what was happening on her property." Colonel Martinez considered this for a moment. "You're right, Mr. Henderson. And, to be perfectly honest, Miss Collins, that's part of why Dr. Wilson is here." She nodded to her colleague. "He's been researching Operation Timberwolf for years as part of the government's declassification efforts. He can provide context that might help you understand what you've discovered." Dr. Wilson leaned forward, his academic enthusiasm barely contained. "Ms. Collins, what you've found appears to be what we called a PineZap facility, a primary intelligence node for Eastern Seaboard analysis and processing. These were essentially rural intelligence hubs that operated outside normal military channels during the height of Cold War tensions. And this one was active from 1958 to 1964, Rebecca asked, recalling the dates on the document boxes. "Precisely," Dr. Wilson continued. "This period represented the most intense phase of the Cold War. The Berlin crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, nuclear testing, the space race. Intelligence gathering was critical, but also politically sensitive." Colonel Martinez interjected, "The unconventional location served multiple purposes. Remote rural areas provided natural security through isolation, while appearing completely ordinary to Soviet satellites or potential spies." "But this is rural Pennsylvania," Rebecca pointed out. "Weren't most Soviet activities happening overseas?" Dr. Wilson exchanged glances with Colonel Martinez before responding. "Western Pennsylvania was strategically significant for several reasons. The region hosted numerous defense contractors, steel production vital to military manufacturing, and transportation infrastructure critical to national security. Soviet intelligence was active throughout industrial America, more active than the public ever knew." Frank nodded grimly. "We had confirmed Soviet assets in Pittsburgh, Erie, even small manufacturing towns. They were everywhere during those years." Rebecca's renovation plans seemed increasingly distant as she tried to grasp the historical significance of what lay beneath her barn. "So people actually worked down there, analyzing intelligence?" "Not permanently," Colonel Martinez explained. "These facilities were designed for periodic use, a place where field operatives could securely transfer information, where analysts could work without drawing attention. Your barn location likely saw activity once or twice a month, with operatives coming and going under the cover of normal farm activities." "The previous farm owner, was he involved?" Rebecca asked. Dr. Wilson pulled a slim folder from his briefcase. "Harold Jenkins, the previous owner, purchased the property from a government shell corporation in 1972, long after operations had ceased. Records suggest he had no knowledge of the facility. Before that, the property was owned by Westland Agricultural Holdings, a front company established by intelligence services." Rebecca tried to imagine covert government agents slipping in and out of the barn, while the surrounding community remained oblivious. It seemed like something from a spy novel, not something that happened in sleepy Pinecrest. "What about the actual documents?" she asked. "You mentioned some were particularly sensitive. What exactly was happening here?" Colonel Martinez hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Dr. Wilson has clearance to explain the general nature of Operation Timberwolf. I believe that's appropriate, given the circumstances." Dr. Wilson's expression grew more serious. Operation Timberwolf was primarily a counterintelligence program designed to track and neutralize Soviet operations on American soil. But what makes your discovery particularly significant is evidence that this specific facility was also part of Protocol Avalanche, a contingency plan developed during the Cuban Missile Crisis. "Contingency plan for what?" Rebecca asked, though something in the historian's tone made her uncertain if she wanted to know. "For nuclear war," Dr. Wilson said quietly. "Protocol Avalanche was a decentralized command and control system, ensuring that if Washington and other major command centers were destroyed, military response operations could continue from facilities exactly like this one. The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. Rebecca glanced toward the barn, visible through her window, trying to reconcile the weathered structure with its apocalyptic purpose. "So this wasn't just for intelligence gathering," Frank said finally. "It was a backup command post for nuclear war." "One of several dozen scattered across the country," Colonel Martinez confirmed. Most were decommissioned and stripped of equipment by 1965 as satellite technology, and hardened military installations made this approach obsolete. But based on what we've seen today, this facility was abandoned hurriedly. The historical record suggests a rapid strategic shift after the 1964 election, with many Timberwolf operations suddenly terminated. Rebecca shook her head, still processing everything. "And now, 60 years later, it just happens to be under my barn." "History has a way of finding us when we least expect it," Dr. Wilson offered with a small smile. "The fact that these materials remained preserved all these years is extraordinary luck from a historical perspective." Colonel Martinez closed her folder decisively. "Here's what I propose, Ms. Collins. We'll need approximately 1 week to properly document and remove the classified materials. During that time, a small team will be on your property, 4 people maximum, operating discreetly. They'll restore the floor of your barn when they're finished, using the materials you've already purchased. Additionally, the Pentagon will cover the complete cost of your renovation as part of the compensation package." Rebecca raised her eyebrows. "The entire renovation? That's considerably more than I budgeted for the flooring." "Consider it fair. Compensation for the inconvenience and for the historical service you've provided by reporting this properly." The colonel withdrew a business card and placed it on the table. "I'll have our legal department contact you tomorrow about the formal arrangement and compensation details. In the meantime, we'd ask that you not discuss the specific nature of what you found with anyone outside this room." Dr. Wilson added eagerly, "Once the classified materials are secured, I'd be happy to share the historical context that can be made public. This discovery will certainly merit inclusion in regional historical records, with your permission, of course." After Colonel Martinez and Dr. Wilson departed, promising to return the next morning with their team, Rebecca and Frank sat in silence at her kitchen table. "Well," Frank said finally, "that wasn't how I expected your barn renovation to go." Rebecca laughed despite herself. "No, not exactly according to plan." She glanced at her watch. "Mia will be home from school in an hour. I have no idea what I'm going to tell her about why there are suddenly government officials in our barn." "The truth, or part of it anyway," Frank suggested. "Kids are fascinated by Cold War history. Tell her you found an old government facility that historians are interested in. She'll think it's the coolest thing ever." Rebecca nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead to practical considerations. "If they're really going to cover the renovation costs, this could change everything. Frank, I could create a proper workshop, maybe even expand the business." Frank's expression grew serious. "Just make sure everything's in writing before you start making plans. I've dealt with government bureaucracy before. Things have a way of getting complicated." The next day brought a flurry of activity to the Collins property. A nondescript van arrived early, carrying 4 people in civilian clothes, who Colonel Martinez introduced as her documentation and retrieval team. They worked efficiently and quietly, establishing a secure perimeter around the barn and beginning the meticulous process of cataloging everything in the underground chamber. Rebecca was both impressed and slightly unnerved by how quickly the government had mobilized resources, By mid-morning, a Pentagon attorney had called to discuss compensation details, and by afternoon, she had received formal documents outlining a generous payment along with renovation specifications that exceeded her most optimistic plans. They're offering to completely modernize the barn while preserving its historical appearance, she told Frank over coffee that evening after Mia had gone to bed. New foundation, proper insulation, electricity, even plumbing. It's everything I wanted to do eventually, but couldn't possibly afford. Frank studied the documents with a practiced eye. Seems legitimate. They're classifying it as historical preservation with a national security component, which gives them plenty of budget flexibility. He looked up at her. Have you signed anything yet? Rebecca shook her head. No, they said to take my time reviewing everything, but honestly, Frank, I don't see a downside here. Just make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to in terms of confidentiality, he advised, and get an independent contractor to review these specifications. The government has deep pockets, but not always the most practical approaches. Mia, as Frank had predicted, was thrilled by the discovery. We have a secret Cold War bunker under our barn. That's the coolest thing ever, she had exclaimed when Rebecca explained the situation in simplified terms. Her daughter had immediately begun researching the Cold War for a special history project, proudly informing her mother that her teacher had been impressed by her sudden interest in 1960s geopolitics. The documentation process continued methodically. Over the next several days, Colonel Martinez visited daily to oversee operations, often accompanied by Dr. Wilson, whose enthusiasm for the historical materials never seemed to diminish. Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn into conversations with the historian, fascinated by the context he provided for what they had discovered. The beauty of history, Dr. Wilson told her as they watched the team carefully packing documents into specialized containers, is that it's never really finished. Just when we think we understand an era completely, something like this emerges and forces us to reconsider our assumptions. On the fourth day, as Rebecca was reviewing renovation plans with Colonel Martinez in her kitchen, an unexpected commotion erupted from the barn. Raised voices carried across the yard, followed by Dr. Wilson hurrying toward the house, his face flushed with excitement. "Colonel," he called as he burst through the door, waving a document in a protective sleeve, "you need to see this immediately. We found it hidden in a false panel in one of the equipment cases." Colonel Martinez took the document, her professional composure momentarily slipping as she read. "Are you absolutely certain about the authentication? The watermark and security codes match other avalanche protocols exactly," Dr. Wilson confirmed. "This isn't just any contingency document. It's the missing Directive 17B. The colonel's expression shifted to one of controlled urgency. "Ms. Collins, would you excuse us for a moment?" Without waiting for a response, she and Dr. Wilson stepped outside onto the porch, speaking in hushed but intense tones. Rebecca knew she should probably respect their privacy, but curiosity got the better of her. She moved closer to the window, catching fragments of their conversation. "Changes everything about our understanding of authorization protocols. The note suggests civilian oversight was circumvented. Need to notify the secretary immediately." When they returned, Colonel Martinez had regained her composure, though a new intensity radiated from her. "Ms. Collins, I apologize for the interruption. It appears we've discovered documents of even greater historical significance than initially assessed. I need to make some calls, but this may accelerate our timeline somewhat." "Is everything all right?" Rebecca asked, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Yes, absolutely," the colonel assured her, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Just some unexpected historical context that requires additional protocols. Dr. Wilson will continue supervising the documentation while I handle some administrative matters. After Colonel Martinez departed with the mysterious document, Rebecca turned to Dr. Wilson. "What was that about? You both seemed pretty shaken." The historian hesitated, clearly weighing professional obligations against his natural inclination to share historical discoveries. "I probably shouldn't discuss specifics until the Colonel gives clearance, but I can tell you that we've found evidence that may significantly alter our understanding of command structures during the Cuban Missile Crisis." His eyes gleamed with academic excitement. It's like discovering a missing puzzle piece that suddenly makes the entire picture clearer and considerably more troubling. That evening, Rebecca noticed increased activity around the barn. 2 additional vehicles had arrived, and the team was working well past their usual stopping time, lights blazing inside the barn as they continued their work. Frank, who had stopped by to check on progress, watched the activity with growing concern. "Something's changed," he observed. "This isn't just routine document retrieval anymore." "Dr. Wilson said they found something important," Rebecca told. Him. "Something about Directive 17B and authorization protocols." Frank's expression darkened. "Directive 17B. Are you sure that's what he said?" "Yes. Does that mean something to you?" The older man was silent for a long moment. "During my service, there were rumors, just whispers really, about certain Cold War protocols that had been implemented without proper authorization. Command structures that operated outside the normal chain, particularly regarding nuclear response options." He shook his head. "But that was just scuttlebutt among intelligence officers, nothing confirmed." Rebecca glanced toward the barn. "Well, it seems like they may have found confirmation in my barn." The next morning brought startling changes. When Rebecca stepped outside to get the newspaper, she found the driveway filled with vehicles and the property perimeter now staffed by uniformed military personnel rather than the previous civilian team. Colonel Martinez approached as Rebecca stood on her porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying the transformation. "Ms. Collins, I apologize for the increased activity. Developments have necessitated additional security protocols. The colonel's tone remained professional, but Rebecca detected an underlying tension that hadn't been present before. "This seems like a lot more than just historical preservation now," Rebecca observed, watching as sophisticated electronic equipment was carried into the barn. Colonel Martinez nodded. "The documents discovered yesterday have significant national security implications, even after all these years. The Secretary of Defense has personally authorized an expanded investigation." She hesitated before adding, "I need to ask for your continued patience and discretion. This operation has become considerably more sensitive." "Do I still have a choice in the matter?" Rebecca asked pointedly, "because it feels like my property has been taken over." "You absolutely have choices," Colonel Martinez assured her. "We can discuss relocating you and your daughter temporarily if the activity becomes too disruptive. The compensation package has also been appropriately adjusted to reflect the expanded scope of our work." She handed Rebecca a folder. "These are the updated terms, including a substantial increase in the payment and renovation allowance." Rebecca glanced at the figure on the first page and nearly dropped her coffee mug. The amount was life-changing, enough to complete the barn renovation, pay off her mortgage, and establish a solid college fund for Mia. "This is a lot more than we discussed initially," she managed to say. "It reflects the exceptional value of what you've discovered," Colonel Martinez replied, "and compensates for the additional disruption." Throughout the day, Rebecca observed the operation from her kitchen window while trying to maintain some normalcy for Mia, who was both excited and confused by the military presence. The activity centered around the underground chamber, with team members constantly moving between the barn and a mobile command center that had been established in a large vehicle parked nearby. Dr. Wilson, apparently still in his element despite the increasingly military nature of the operation, stopped by the house mid-afternoon to check on Rebecca. "Quite a circus out there now," she commented as they sat at her kitchen table. "Indeed," he agreed with a rueful smile. "Though I assure you it's warranted given what we've found." He leaned forward. "Colonel Martinez has authorized me to provide you with some additional context, given that this is your property and you've been extraordinarily cooperative." "I'm listening," Rebecca said, curious despite her growing wariness about the situation. "What we've discovered goes beyond just historical intelligence operations," Dr. Wilson explained. "The documents found yesterday contain detailed information about a parallel command structure that was established during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Essentially, a shadow authority with pre-authorization to launch limited nuclear strikes under specific circumstances." Rebecca felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. "That sounds terrifying." "It was a terrifying time," Dr. Wilson acknowledged. "What makes these documents so significant is that they indicate this authority was established without full presidential knowledge or approval, a clear violation of constitutional chain of command. Some military leaders, believing nuclear war was inevitable, created contingency plans that would have bypassed civilian control in certain scenarios." "And this was happening from my barn?" Rebecca asked incredulously. "Not just from here, this was one node in a network, but your location appears to have been a key communication hub for the region." He adjusted his glasses. "The truly remarkable aspect is that these protocols were apparently never fully dismantled. According to what we've found, elements of this parallel structure may have remained in place well into the 1980s, unknown to subsequent administrations." Rebecca struggled to process the implications. "So that's why the Pentagon is suddenly treating my barn like it's Fort Knox?" "Precisely," Dr. Wilson confirmed. "These documents provide evidence of what amounts to a constitutional crisis that never became public, and potentially identify individuals who were involved, some of whom are still alive and held significant positions after the Cold War." "This isn't just history anymore, is it?" Rebecca realized. "This is current politics. The intersection of history and contemporary national security," Dr. Wilson agreed, "which explains the robust response you're witnessing." Later that evening, as Rebecca was helping Mia with homework, a sharp knock came at the door. She opened it to find Colonel Martinez looking uncharacteristically tense. "Miss Collins, we need to implement additional security measures immediately. Our teams have detected unusual surveillance activity in the vicinity of your property." "Surveillance? What kind of surveillance?" "Unknown individuals monitoring our operation from the surrounding area. Given the sensitive nature of what we're handling, we can't rule out foreign intelligence interest." The colonel's expression was grave. "I strongly recommend that you and your daughter relocate temporarily until we complete our work here." Rebecca felt a surge of alarm. "Are we in danger?" "Not immediately, but as a precaution, we'd prefer to have you off-site. We've arranged accommodations at a secure location." Seeing Rebecca's hesitation, she added, "This is for your protection, Ms. Collins. The documents you discovered have significant implications for individuals and entities who would prefer they remained buried. Until we've secured everything, there's an elevated risk profile." Rebecca glanced back at Mia, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes from the dining table. "How long are we talking about?" 3 days maximum. We've accelerated the extraction timeline in light of the surveillance detection. Colonel Martinez handed her a card with an address. This location is comfortable and secure. A car is waiting whenever you're ready. Rebecca hesitated, torn between concern for Mia's safety and reluctance to be pushed from her home. Can I have a few minutes to pack some things? Of course. The colonel stepped back. I'll wait outside. Once Colonel Martinez had left, Rebecca turned to find Frank standing in the kitchen doorway, having arrived through the back door, as was his habit. I heard most of that, he said quietly. Things have escalated pretty quickly. What should I do, Frank? Is this normal procedure or should I be worried? Frank considered for a moment. Based on my experience, if they've detected surveillance, their concern is legitimate. But I'm not comfortable with you and Mia going to some undisclosed location without verification. He pulled out his phone. Let me make a call to an old colleague who's still active in Army intelligence. I want to confirm this is all by the book. Dame, while Frank stepped outside to make his call, Rebecca quickly packed overnight bags for herself and Mia, trying to maintain a calm demeanor for her daughter's benefit. Is this because of the secret bunker? Mia asked, watching her mother gather toiletries. Yes, sweetie. The government people found some important old papers and they need to finish their work without us underfoot. Rebecca forced a smile. Think of it like a mini vacation. They're putting us up in a nice hotel for a couple of days. When Frank returned, his expression was more relaxed. I spoke with my contact. He confirmed there's a legitimate operation centered on your property with authorization from the highest levels. The relocation protocol is standard procedure when civilian property owners are involved in sensitive recovery operations. Rebecca felt some of her tension ease. So you think we should go? Yes, but I'm coming with you, Frank stated firmly. I told my contact I'm acting as family security consultant, and he's cleared it with Colonel Martinez. If anything seems off, I'll be there. With Frank's steadying presence, Rebecca felt more confident about the situation. They finished packing quickly, and within 30 minutes, they were in a government SUV heading toward Pittsburgh, escorted by 2 additional vehicles. As they left Pinecrest behind, Rebecca gazed back at her property, now transformed into what looked like a military operation, with lights illuminating the barn and personnel moving purposefully around the perimeter. In just 5 days, her simple renovation project had morphed into something she could never have imagined, pulling her family into the shadowy aftermath of decades-old Cold War secrets. The secure location turned out to be a luxurious suite, yet an upscale hotel in downtown Pittsburgh with adjoining rooms for Frank and the security personnel who would remain stationed in the hallway. Despite the comfortable surroundings, Rebecca found sleep elusive that night, her mind racing with questions about what other secrets might lie beneath her property and what the implications might be for her family's future. The next morning, a secure video call was arranged with Colonel Martinez, who reported that extraction of the documents was proceeding ahead of schedule. We've secured approximately 80% of the sensitive materials, she explained. Barring complications, we should complete operations by tomorrow evening, at which point you can return home. Have you identified who was conducting surveillance? Frank asked from beside Rebecca. The colonel's expression remained neutral. We have some leads, nothing that presents an immediate threat, but we're maintaining enhanced security protocols until the extraction is complete. After the call ended, Frank shared his impression. She's being careful about what she says, but I get the sense they know exactly who's watching them and why. This isn't just about old documents anymore. By the afternoon of the second day, Mia had thoroughly explored the hotel's amenities and was beginning to grow restless. Rebecca was considering taking her to a nearby museum when another call came from Colonel Martinez. We've had a significant development. the colonel announced without preamble. One of the documents recovered contained coordinates for what appears to be a secondary facility, located approximately 3 miles from your property. Another bunker? Rebecca asked, surprised. We believe so, based on the protocols outlined in the recovered documents. Primary facilities like yours were often paired with smaller backup locations. We're preparing to investigate this secondary site tomorrow. Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Does this mean we'll be staying away longer? Actually, no, Colonel Martinez replied. We've completed the extraction of all materials from your property. A team is already restoring your barn floor as promised, and we'll begin withdrawing most personnel this evening. You're cleared to return home tomorrow morning. True to the colonel's word, when they returned to the property the following day, the military presence had been significantly reduced. The barn, which had been the center of so much activity, stood quiet and ordinary-looking once again. Only a small team remained, centered around what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar equipment being loaded into vehicles. Colonel Martinez met them in the driveway. Ms. Collins, thank you for your patience and cooperation throughout this operation. As promised, we've restored your barn floor completely. In fact, we took the liberty of implementing some of the structural improvements from the renovation plans. Rebecca walked to the barn and pulled open the heavy doors, gasping at what she found inside. Not only had the floor been entirely replaced with high-quality hardwood, but the supporting beams had been reinforced, the walls insulated, and electrical wiring installed throughout. What had been a deteriorating structure days earlier now looked like a professionally renovated workspace, still maintaining its rustic barn aesthetic, but with modern functionality. This is far more than I expected, she admitted, running her hand along a perfectly finished support beam. Consider it part of your compensation package, Colonel Martinez said, joining her at the entrance. The full financial compensation has been processed as well. You should see the funds in your account within 48 hours. Frank whistled softly as he inspected the renovation. You folks don't do things halfway, do you? The Pentagon believes in appropriate compensation for citizens who assist in matters of national security, the colonel replied with a small smile. Particularly when that assistance involves such historically significant materials. As Mia explored the renovated barn with excited exclamations, Rebecca turned to Colonel Martinez. What happens now with the documents? Will I ever know the full story of what was happening under my property? Dr. Wilson has prepared a comprehensive historical summary of the non-classified aspects, which I'll leave with you, the colonel explained. As for the more sensitive materials, they're being transported to secure facilities for further analysis. Some may eventually be declassified, but that process typically takes years. And the other site you mentioned, the secondary facility? Colonel Martinez hesitated briefly. That investigation is ongoing. If we discover anything that directly relates to your property, I'll ensure you're informed to the extent security protocols allow. After the remaining government personnel departed that afternoon, Rebecca, Mia, and Frank sat on the porch, watching the sunset cast long shadows from the newly renovated barn across the property. So that's it? Mia asked. The secret government people just fix our barn and leave. Rebecca smiled at her daughter's disappointed tone. They found what they were looking for, sweetheart. The history books will probably be rewritten because of what was under our barn. That's pretty special. Frank nodded thoughtfully. Cold War secrets finally coming to light after all these years. Makes you wonder what else is buried out there, waiting to be found. As dusk settled over the property, Rebecca gazed at the barn, her barn now ready for the workshop she had dreamed of creating. The path to this moment had been nothing like she'd imagined. involving Cold War intelligence, Pentagon officials, and decades-old secrets rather than simple renovation work. Yet somehow she had arrived exactly where she hoped to be, with new possibilities stretching before her family. "You know," she said quietly, "I bought this place thinking I was just getting a fixer-upper with a run-down barn. I never imagined I was also getting a piece of hidden history." Frank chuckled. "Life rarely follows our renovation plans, Becky. Sometimes the most interesting discoveries happen when the floor falls out from under you." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rebecca Collins considered the strange journey of the past week. How a simple desire to create a better life for her daughter had unexpectedly connected her to one of history's most tense periods, bringing both material rewards and a profound sense that her small piece of land in Pinecrest had played a role in events far larger than she had ever imagined. The barn stood silhouetted against the evening sky, no longer just a structure to be renovated, but a testament to hidden history and unexpected possibilities. A reminder that beneath the ordinary surface of everyday life, extraordinary stories sometimes wait to be discovered. Mia turned her laptop around, showing Rebecca a scanned newspaper article from the Pinecrest Gazette dated June 1962. The headline read, "Strange lights reported near Westland property. Officials cite mining equipment. Tests. See?" Mia pointed excitedly at the screen. People saw weird lights and heard humming sounds at night. But when they asked about it, some government officials said it was just equipment testing for potential mine reopening. But the mine never reopened. And look at the dates. This was right during the Cuban Missile Crisis that I'm studying for my project. Rebecca read the article with growing unease. The descriptions were vague enough to be dismissed as ordinary activity, but in light of what she now knew about Protocol Avalanche and the nearby intelligence facility under her barn, the reported phenomena took on a more ominous significance. "That's really interesting historical research, Mia," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've got a good eye for connecting information." "There's more," Mia continued, scrolling to another article. 2 months after this, 3 men in suits visited everyone who had reported seeing the lights. This article says they were insurance assessors evaluating claims of potential property damage from mining vibrations. But doesn't that seem weird? Why would insurance people care about lights in the sky? Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. The timeline aligned perfectly with the Cuban Missile Crisis and the most active period of her property's secret facility, according to Dr. Wilson's summary. Whatever had been happening at the Westland property was almost certainly connected to Protocol Avalanche. "Very observant," she told her daughter, ruffling her hair affectionately while trying to hide her concern. "You're going to get an A+ on this history project for sure." As soon as she could, Rebecca called Frank and explained what Mia had discovered. "She stumbled onto this completely independently," she told him. "If a 12-year-old can connect these dots through public records, what does that say about the Pentagon's security concerns?" "It says your daughter is exceptionally bright," Frank replied. "But it also confirms we need to take that letter seriously." The secondary facility was clearly at the Westland property, and apparently not as secret as they intended even back then. They agreed to visit the location that afternoon, with Rebecca telling Mia she was going to help Frank with an errand, while Mia stayed at her friend Zoe's house for a previously arranged play date. It wasn't technically a lie, but Rebecca felt guilty about the omission. Still, involving her daughter any further in this mystery seemed imprudent given the warning in the anonymous letter. The Westland mining property was accessible via a deteriorating gravel road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Frank's truck handled the rough terrain admirably, but they eventually reached a point where fallen trees blocked further progress. "We'll have to continue on foot," Frank said, retrieving a backpack containing water bottles, flashlights, and a first aid kit. preparations that made Rebecca realize how seriously he was taking this expedition. "You think we'll actually find something, don't you?" she asked as they began hiking along what had once been an access road, now overgrown with young trees and dense underbrush. "I think someone went to the trouble of sending you that letter for a reason," Frank replied. "And your daughter's research confirms there was unusual activity here during precisely the right time period. It's worth investigating, but carefully." They hiked in silence for nearly a mile, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot as they followed the remnants of the old mining road. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns that shifted with the breeze. Under different circumstances, it would have been a pleasant woodland walk. "The main mine entrance should be just ahead," Frank said, consulting a printed map he'd brought. According to county records, Westland shut down operations in 1957 due to depleted coal seams, but they maintained ownership of the property until 1972, the same year your property was sold to Harold Jenkins. "That can't be coincidence," Rebecca observed. "In intelligence work, there are rarely coincidences," Frank agreed, "just connections we haven't identified yet." They rounded a bend in the overgrown road and found themselves facing the collapsed entrance of the old coal mine, its timber supports long since rotted away. A rusted metal sign warning "Danger, No Entry" hung askew from a single remaining bolt. "This isn't what we're looking for," Frank said, scanning the surrounding area. "A secondary intelligence facility wouldn't be inside an unstable mine. It would be purpose-built, probably disguised as mining infrastructure, but separate from actual mining operations." They explored the perimeter of the main mine area, examining crumbling concrete foundations that had once supported processing equipment and administrative buildings. Most were so deteriorated and overgrown that their original purposes were difficult to determine. "Over here," Rebecca called after they had been searching for about 20 minutes. She had discovered what appeared to be a small equipment shed nestled against a hillside about 100 yards from the main mine entrance. Unlike the other structures, this one seemed intentionally obscured by native plantings that had matured over decades. The shed's metal door was secured with a padlock that had succumbed to decades of exposure, its locking mechanism so corroded that it crumbled when Frank applied pressure with a multi-tool from his pocket. Inside, they found what appeared to be an ordinary maintenance space with wall-mounted tool racks and the rusted remains of mining equipment. "This looks disappointing normal," Rebecca observed, surveying the dusty interior. Frank was examining the back wall carefully. "Maybe not," he said, pointing to subtle irregularities in the concrete floor near the rear wall. "See these marks? Something heavy was moved across this floor repeatedly, something that scraped the concrete." Upon closer inspection, Rebecca could see faint parallel grooves leading to the back wall. Frank ran his hands along the wall's surface, pressing methodically until they heard a distinct click. A section of the wall, disguised with the same concrete texture as its surroundings, shifted inward slightly. "Clever," Frank murmured, applying steady pressure. The false wall pivoted smoothly, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Even after all these years, the mechanism still works. Rebecca stared into the darkness beyond the hidden door. "Should we really go in there? What if it's unstable after all this time?" Frank shone his flashlight into the passage, revealing a concrete-lined corridor that appeared structurally sound. Military construction from this era was built to last. "But you're right to be cautious. I'll go first, and if anything seems unsafe, we turn back immediately." The passage extended about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber roughly half the size of the facility beneath Rebecca's barn. Unlike her barn's underground room, which had been filled with document boxes and equipment, this space was nearly empty. Metal shelving units lined the walls, but they contained only a few abandoned items. Empty binders, coils of cable, and what appeared to be parts for electronic equipment. "Looks like they cleaned this place out pretty thoroughly," Rebecca observed, playing her flashlight around the chamber. "Standard decommissioning protocol," Frank agreed. "But remember what the letter said, not everything was removed." They methodically searched the room, checking each shelf and examining the floor and walls for any signs of hidden compartments or overlooked materials. Their flashlight beams created moving shadows that lent an eerie atmosphere to the abandoned facility. "Over here," Frank called from the far corner of the room. "There's another door." The second door led to a smaller room that appeared to have been some kind of communication center. The remains of mounting brackets on the walls suggested that equipment had once been installed there, though all of it had been removed. A large metal desk was bolted to the floor in the center of the room. "Check the desk," Frank suggested. These old military desks often had hidden compartments. Rebecca examined the desk carefully, pulling open empty drawers and checking for false bottoms. Nothing seemed unusual until she noticed that the desk's surface had small metal brackets at each corner, as if something had once been secured to it. "I think there was some kind of equipment mounted on top," she said, running her fingers along the brackets. "Maybe a radio or—" She stopped suddenly as her fingers detected a slight depression in the metal surface. Pressing firmly, she felt something give way with a soft click. A narrow drawer, cleverly concealed in what appeared to be a solid front panel of the desk, slid open a few inches. Inside lay a single manila envelope, discolored with age. "Someone left this deliberately," Frank observed, his voice low. "That's not the kind of hiding place you overlook during decommissioning." Rebecca carefully removed the envelope. Unlike the document boxes from her barn, this had no official markings or security classifications. When she opened it, she found a handwritten letter paperclipped to several typewritten pages and what appeared to be technical diagrams. "Is it safe to read here?" she asked, looking to Frank. He nodded, shining his flashlight to provide better illumination. "Go ahead, but be careful with the paper. It's likely fragile after all these years." Rebecca began reading the handwritten letter aloud, her voice echoing slightly in the underground chamber. "To whoever finds this, my name is Captain Edward Mercer, U.S. Army Intelligence Corps. If you're reading this, you've discovered one of the protocol avalanche facilities, and it likely means the truth has begun to emerge after all these years. I am leaving this document against direct orders, but I cannot in good conscience allow what happened here to remain buried forever. What you must understand is that Protocol Avalanche began as a legitimate contingency plan, a response network in case of Soviet first strike, but evolved into something far more dangerous under the direction of General Morris and his inner circle. By October 1962, Avalanche had become a rogue operation, developing capabilities and authorities that circumvented the constitutional chain of command. The attached documents provide evidence that during the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, General Morris and his command team prepared to initiate limited nuclear strikes against Soviet installations without presidential authorization. They believed war was inevitable and that political leadership would hesitate until it was too late. What stopped them wasn't the diplomatic resolution between Kennedy and Khrushchev. It was the courage of 3 officers at the Pentagon who discovered the plan and confronted General Morris directly on October 27, 1962, threatening to alert the Joint Chiefs if he proceeded. The official story is that Protocol Avalanche was gradually phased out beginning in 1963, as technology made these distributed command centers obsolete. The truth is that the program was abruptly terminated and its very existence obscured to protect those involved and to prevent public knowledge of how close we came to unauthorized nuclear launch. I was stationed at Northeast Command Node 7, beneath what is now private property near Pinecrest, during this period. When decommissioning began, I was ordered to oversee the destruction of all evidence related to General Morris's unauthorized plans. Instead, I secured key documents here at the secondary facility, where I knew they would remain undisturbed until history was ready for the truth. I do not know what world you live in as you read this, or how much has changed, but I believe that in any era, accountability matters. The American people deserve to know how close we came to disaster, not from Soviet aggression, but from the actions of those who were meant to protect us. Proceed with caution. There are still those who would prefer this history remain buried. Captain Edward Mercer, November 19th, 1964. Rebecca looked up from the letter, meeting Frank's troubled gaze. This is incredible. If it's authentic, it's historically explosive. And potentially still sensitive, even after all these years, Frank added. What are the attached documents? Rebecca carefully examined the remaining papers. They included what appeared to be partial operation orders for nuclear strikes against 3 targets in Cuba, memoranda discussing timeline scenarios that bypassed presidential authorization under certain conditions, and a technical diagram of what was labeled Emergency Authentication Override System. These look genuine, Frank said, examining the documents with a practiced eye. The formatting, terminology, and classification markings are consistent with military documentation from that period. So Captain Mercer was alerting future generations to what almost happened, Rebecca said, trying to process the significance of their discovery. A nuclear strike nearly launched without presidential approval. And from the sounds of it, possibly using your property's facility as part of the command network. Frank carefully returned the documents to the envelope. This explains the urgency when they found Directive 17B under your barn. These materials directly implicate high-ranking military officers in what would have amounted to treason. The weight of the discovery settled over them as they stood in the dim underground chamber. What had begun as a simple barn renovation had led Rebecca to what might be one of the most significant historical revelations about the Cold War, evidence of a near catastrophe that had remained hidden for decades. "What do we do with this?" she asked finally. Frank considered for a moment. "That depends on who you trust more, Captain Mercer from 1964 or Colonel Martinez and her team from today." "The letter I received warned against trusting anyone in uniform," Rebecca remembered. "Which could mean the Pentagon team that examined your property," Frank acknowledged. "Or it could mean someone else entirely is trying to manipulate you. Without knowing who sent that letter, it's hard to judge their motives." "Captain Mercer seemed to believe the American people deserve to know the truth," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "That aligns with Dr. Wilson's perspective as a historian." Frank nodded slowly. "Dr. Wilson might be our best option. He's a civilian historian with security clearance, someone who could authenticate these documents properly and ensure they're handled responsibly. But how do we contact him without going through Colonel Martinez?" Frank smiled slightly. "I might have anticipated this need." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I asked my former colleague for Dr. Wilson's direct contact information, just in case further historical questions arose. Said you were interested in following up on some of the non-classified historical aspects." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You suspected we'd find something?" "Let's just say, I've been in intelligence long enough to recognize when there's more to a story," Frank replied, showing her Dr. Wilson's contact information. "The question is, do we call him now or wait until we're somewhere more secure?" After discussing their options, they decided to leave the underground facility immediately and contact Dr. Wilson from Frank's house rather than from the remote location. They carefully replaced the false wall that concealed the entrance, making it appear undisturbed, and hiked back to Frank's truck in thoughtful silence. The autumn afternoon was fading toward evening by the time they reached Frank's small ranch-style home on the outskirts of Pinecrest. After ensuring they hadn't been followed, Frank made the call to Dr. Wilson, keeping his explanation deliberately vague, simply saying that they had discovered additional historical materials related to the Pinecrest facility and wanted his expert assessment. To their surprise, Dr. Wilson agreed to drive out from Pittsburgh immediately. "I'm actually in the area for a conference at Westland State University," he explained over the phone. "I can be there in about 40 minutes if that works for you." After ending the call, Frank turned to Rebecca. "That was almost too convenient." "You think he might have been monitoring us?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "It's possible, or he might genuinely be nearby for professional reasons." Frank began preparing coffee. "Either way, we'll know. More when he arrives. In the meantime, I think we should make copies of everything, just as insurance." Using Frank's scanner, they created digital copies of Captain Mercer's letter and all the accompanying documents, storing them on an encrypted USB drive that Frank kept in a fireproof safe, a precaution that felt melodramatic to Rebecca until she reminded herself of the historical significance of what they had discovered. Dr. Wilson arrived precisely when expected, looking exactly as Rebecca remembered him. Tweed jacket, wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of academic enthusiasm. He was surprised to find Rebecca at Frank's house rather than her own property. He didn't show it. "Ms. Collins, Mr. Henderson," he greeted them warmly. "I'm intrigued by your call. You mentioned additional historical materials." Frank invited him inside, offering coffee while Rebecca explained their discovery of the secondary facility and the hidden documents. She deliberately omitted any mention of the anonymous letter that had prompted their investigation, watching carefully for Dr. Wilson's reaction. The historian's expression shifted from professional interest to barely contained excitement as she described Captain Mercer's letter. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the manila envelope on Frank's coffee table. Rebecca nodded, and Dr. Wilson carefully examined the contents, handling the aged documents with the reverence of someone accustomed to working with historical materials. His expression grew increasingly grave as he read. "This is," he began, then paused, collecting his thoughts. "If authentic, and I have every reason to believe it is based on the format, paper type, and historical context, this is perhaps the most significant documentation of unauthorized nuclear authority I've ever encountered." So Captain Mercer's account aligns with what you know about Protocol Avalanche?" Frank asked. Dr. Wilson nodded slowly. "It fills in critical gaps in our understanding. We knew from the documents at Ms. Collins's property that there was a parallel command structure, but the direct evidence of planned, unauthorized strikes was missing." He looked up, his expression troubled. "This confirms our worst fears about how close we came to catastrophe during those 13 days in October." "What should we do with this information?" Rebecca asked, echoing the question she had posed. To Frank earlier, Dr. Wilson considered this carefully. "Historically speaking, these documents deserve to be preserved and eventually made public through proper channels. They represent a crucial missing piece in our understanding of the Cuban Missile Crisis." He hesitated. "However, there are still significant security and political sensitivities involved, even after all these years. Someone sent me an anonymous letter suggesting that not everything had been removed from the secondary site," Rebecca admitted finally. "It specifically warned against trusting anyone in uniform." If Dr. Wilson was surprised by this revelation, he concealed it well. "That's concerning. Did you bring this to Colonel Martinez's attention?" "We wanted to verify if there was actually Anything to find first, Frank explained. The historian nodded. A reasonable precaution. The question now is whether this warning referred to potential danger from current military or intelligence officials, or whether it was simply encouraging historical transparency. What would you recommend? Rebecca asked. Dr. Wilson removed his glasses and cleaned them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. I believe these documents should be properly authenticated and preserved through official channels. I have connections at the National Archives and the Cold War History Project who could ensure they're handled appropriately. He replaced his glasses. But I also understand your concern about who can be trusted with this information. If we give you these documents, Frank asked directly, can you guarantee they won't simply disappear into another classified vault for another 60 years? I can't offer absolute guarantees, Dr. Wilson admitted, but I can promise to advocate forcefully for declassification of as much of this material as possible. The historical significance alone justifies public access with appropriate redactions for still sensitive operational details. Rebecca and Frank exchanged glances, silently weighing their options. After a moment, Rebecca nodded slightly. We'd like you to take the originals for proper preservation and authentication, she told Dr. Wilson, but we've made copies as insurance. If the materials simply vanish, we'll have options for ensuring the historical record isn't buried again. Dr. Wilson's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. A prudent arrangement. I would expect nothing less from someone who's already demonstrated such care for historical preservation. He carefully returned the documents to their envelope. I'll ensure these receive proper attention from qualified experts in both the historical and national security communities. As Dr. Wilson prepared to leave with the documents, he paused at Frank's front door. You should know, Ms. Collins, that your discovery has already set changes in motion within certain government circles. There are ongoing discussions about declassification of Cuban Missile Crisis materials that have been withheld for decades. Because of what was found under my barn? Rebecca asked, surprised. Partly, but also because many involved in maintaining these secrets recognize that history deserves accuracy, even when that accuracy is uncomfortable. He smiled slightly. Captain Mercer wasn't alone in believing the American people deserve the truth. After Dr. Wilson departed, Rebecca and Frank sat in silence for several minutes, processing the day's events. Do you think we did the right thing? Rebecca asked finally. Frank considered this. I think we've done the most responsible thing possible under the circumstances. Dr. Wilson has the expertise and clearance to handle these materials properly, and we've maintained insurance against them being buried again. I should pick up Mia from her friend's house, Rebecca said, glancing at her watch. This has been quite a day. Indeed it has. Frank walked her to the door. Be vigilant, Becky. Until we know who sent that letter and why, it's best to remain cautious. The warning lingered in Rebecca's mind as she drove to collect Mia. What had begun as a simple barn renovation had evolved into something far more complex, a historical discovery with potential implications that stretched from the height of the Cold War to the present day. And somehow, she had become the custodian of secrets that powerful people had tried to keep buried for decades. As she pulled into Zoe's driveway, Rebecca pushed these thoughts aside, determined to maintain normalcy for Mia's sake. Her daughter's innocent historical research had proven remarkably prescient, but Rebecca had no intention of burdening her. With the full weight of what they had discovered at the Westland property, the evening passed uneventfully, with Mia chattering about her day with Zoe while Rebecca prepared dinner, responding with appropriate interest while her mind continued to process the implications of Captain Mercer's hidden documents. After Mia went to bed, Rebecca found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the renovated barn illuminated by security lights she had installed after the Pentagon team's departure. The structure that had once represented her hopes for financial independence now stood as a monument to hidden history, a reminder that beneath the surface of ordinary life, extraordinary secrets sometimes waited to be discovered. She wondered what Captain Mercer would think, knowing that nearly 60 years after he defied orders to preserve the truth, someone had finally found his hidden testament. A soft ping from her phone interrupted her thoughts. A text message from Frank, just heard from my contact. Unusual activity at Pentagon Historical Archives Division might be related to our discovery. Stay alert. Rebecca stared at the message, a mixture of concern and validation washing over her. Whatever happened next, it seemed the truth Captain Mercer had tried to preserve was finally emerging from decades of intentional obscurity. Her simple desire to renovate an old barn had somehow made her part of correcting the historical record, about one of the most dangerous moments in American history. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca couldn't help but wonder what other discoveries might still await, what other secrets the past held that might yet come to light. For now, though, she would focus on the everyday concerns of raising her daughter and building her business in the newly renovated workshop. History had found her once. Whether it would do so again remained to be seen. Dr. Wilson's letter continued on the second page. After consultation with relevant agencies, an accelerated declassification review has been approved for most of these materials. I'm particularly pleased to inform you that Captain Mercer's personal testimony regarding unauthorized nuclear strike planning during the Cuban Missile Crisis has been cleared for public release with minimal redactions. The National Archives is planning a special exhibition titled Shadows of the Cold War, The Avalanche Revelations, that will feature the documents you discovered alongside newly declassified materials from other protocol avalanche facilities. As the individual whose renovation project led to these extraordinary historical finds, we would be honored if you would participate in the opening ceremony scheduled for March 15th next year. Additionally, a formal acknowledgement of your contribution to American historical understanding will be presented by the Archivist of the United States. Few private citizens have made such significant contributions to our national historical record, and we believe this recognition is well deserved. Should you have any questions or wish to discuss the exhibition further, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. With deepest appreciation, Dr. Harold Wilson, Senior Historian, Cold War Archives Division. Rebecca read the letter twice, scarcely believing its contents. What had begun as a simple barn renovation had somehow led to a national museum exhibition and formal recognition from the United States government. It seemed surreal, like something that happened to other people. Historians, researchers, or academics, not to single mothers trying to create better lives for their daughters in small-town Pennsylvania. She called Frank immediately, reading him the letter word for word. "Remarkable," he said when she finished, though not entirely surprising given the historical significance of what Captain Mercer preserved. "Are you going to participate in this exhibition opening?" "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "Part of me wants to put this whole thing behind us and focus on the furniture business and Mia. But another part feels like I owe it to Captain Mercer to see this through, to make sure his effort to preserve the truth wasn't wasted." "For what?" "It's worth," Frank said thoughtfully. "I think he would appreciate knowing that an ordinary citizen, someone outside the military and intelligence establishment, helped bring his testimony to light. There's something fitting about that." The conversation was interrupted by Mia bursting into the kitchen, waving a paper excitedly. "Mom, you won't believe this. My history teacher says my Cold War project is being submitted to the state history competition. She says it's the best research she's seen from a middle schooler in 20 years of teaching." Rebecca couldn't help but smile at the irony. Mia's project, focusing on the recently disclosed Pinecrest intelligence facility and its role during the Cuban Missile Crisis, had indeed featured exceptional research, though her daughter remained unaware of how much more her mother knew about the subject. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. If I win at state, it goes to the national competition in Washington, D.C." Mia continued breathlessly. "Can you imagine? We could go to the Capitol together." As her daughter chatted excitedly about the competition details, Rebecca glanced down at Dr. Wilson's letter again. Perhaps there was a way to bring closure to this unexpected chapter in their lives while supporting Mia's newfound passion for history. The exhibition opening in March would likely coincide with the National History Competition if Mia's project advanced that far. "Mia," she said when her daughter paused for breath, "how would you feel about visiting the National Archives as part of our Washington trip if your project makes it to Nationals?" "Are you kidding? That would be amazing. They have the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution there. And," Rebecca added carefully, "they're planning a special exhibition about the Cold War facility you researched, the one they found under our barn." Mia's eyes widened. "Really? Could we see that too?" "Absolutely. In fact," Rebecca hesitated briefly before continuing, "I've been invited to participate in the opening ceremony because of our connection to the discovery." "Wait, what?" Mia stared at her mother in confusion. "You're being invited to a museum exhibition opening? Like, officially?" Rebecca realized she would need to explain more than she had previously shared with her daughter. "Sit down, Mia. There's a bit more to the story of what they found under our barn than I've told you." Over the next hour, Rebecca carefully explained the discoveries at both their property and the Westland site, omitting the more sensitive details, but helping Mia understand why the government considered the findings historically significant. Her daughter listened with growing amazement, occasionally interrupting with questions that demonstrated her developing historical perspective. "So, Captain Mercer hid these documents because he thought people should know the truth someday?" Mia asked when Rebecca finished her explanation. "Even though he was disobeying orders?" "That's right," Rebecca confirmed. "He believed that preserving the historical truth was more important than following orders that would have erased it." Mia was quiet for a moment, processing this. "That's really brave," she said finally. "Standing up for what's right even when it's hard." "It was," Rebecca agreed, touched by her daughter's moral clarity. "And now, because of what we found during our barn renovation, his bravery won't be forgotten." The following months brought significant changes to the Collins household. The furniture restoration business flourished in the renovated barn workshop, allowing Rebecca to expand her operations and hire a part-time assistant. Mia's history project won first place at the regional competition, advancing to the state level where it earned honorable mention. Not quite enough to reach nationals, but an impressive achievement for a 7th grader. Though initially disappointed about missing the Washington trip, Mia's spirits lifted considerably when Dr. Wilson personally called to invite them to a preview of the Avalanche exhibition the week before the official opening. This would allow Mia to see the exhibition without missing school for the formal ceremony and give Rebecca an opportunity to review how her role in the discovery was presented. As winter yielded to early spring, the media began publishing previews of the upcoming exhibition. Rebecca was surprised to find herself mentioned prominently in these articles, often described as the civilian renovator whose discovery led to a reassessment of Cuban Missile Crisis history. Several journalists requested interviews, which she politely declined, preferring to maintain as much privacy as possible for her family. Frank, meanwhile, had been unexpectedly drawn into the historical documentation process, his military intelligence background making him a valuable consultant. for contextualizing certain aspects of the avalanche documents. He occasionally traveled to Washington for consultations with Dr. Wilson's team, returning with updates about the exhibition's development. "They're taking great care with how this is presented," he told Rebecca after his most recent trip. "The focus is on the historical significance and constitutional implications, not sensationalism. Captain Mercer's testimony is treated with appropriate gravity." "And how am I portrayed in all this?" Rebecca asked, still uncomfortable with her unexpected role in historical events. Frank smiled. As the observant citizen who recognized the significance of what she found and ensured it reached appropriate authorities. "The narrative presents you quite respectfully, a responsible civilian who helped bridge a historical gap." In early March, as their trip to Washington approached, Rebecca received another unexpected communication, this time a formal letter from the Department of Defense. Unlike Dr. Wilson's warmly academic tone, this correspondence was officially succinct. "The Secretary of Defense acknowledges your service to historical truth and governmental transparency through your responsible handling of sensitive historical materials related to Operation Timberwolf and Protocol Avalanche. Your actions exemplify the highest standards of civilian cooperation in matters of national security and historical significance. In recognition of this service, you are invited to attend a private reception following the National Archives exhibition, opening on March 15th, where the Secretary would like to personally express the department's appreciation." "They're certainly pulling out all the stops," Frank observed when Rebecca showed him the invitation. "A Secretary of Defense doesn't normally get involved in historical exhibitions." "Why do you think they're making such a big deal of this?" Rebecca asked. "Is it just public relations showing they're transparent about past mistakes?" Frank considered this. "Partly, perhaps. But I suspect there's another dimension. By acknowledging these historical documents officially and thanking you publicly for discovering them, they're effectively neutralizing any potential controversy. It's harder to claim there's a cover-up when the government itself is hosting the exhibition." The week before their Washington trip, Rebecca received a large package from the National Archives containing advance copies of the exhibition catalog and educational materials. Mia immediately claimed the educational booklet, comparing its content to her research project and noting with satisfaction where her own conclusions aligned with the official historical record. Rebecca spent more time with the comprehensive catalog, which included high-quality reproductions of selected documents alongside scholarly analysis of their significance. Captain Mercer's letter was reproduced in full, his measured handwriting preserved on the page as he documented one of the most dangerous moments in Cold War history. A special section titled "The Pinecrest Discovery" detailed how the documents had been found, including photographs of Rebecca's barn before and after renovation. The narrative was factual but respectful, focusing on the historical importance rather than treating the discovery as a curiosity. A sidebar featured a brief interview with Dr. Wilson about the authentication process and the decision to fast-track declassification. The most surprising element came near the catalog's end, a short essay titled "Why Historical Truth Matters," authored by the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In careful, measured language, the senior military officer acknowledged the constitutional breach that Protocol Avalanche had represented and affirmed the military's commitment to civilian control, describing Captain Mercer's preservation of these records as an act of moral courage that honors his oath to the Constitution above all else. 2 days before their scheduled departure for Washington, Rebecca was putting final touches on a cherrywood dining table in her workshop when she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. Looking up, she saw a black SUV similar to those used by Colonel Martinez's team months earlier. For a moment, she felt a flicker of concern that some new complication had arisen. Instead, it was Dr. Wilson who emerged from the vehicle, wearing his customary tweed jacket despite the cool spring rain. Rebecca welcomed him into the house, curious about this unannounced visit. "I apologize for arriving without warning," the historian said as he accepted a cup of coffee. "I'm in the area for a lecture at Westland State University and wanted to speak with you personally before the exhibition opening." "Is there a problem with the arrangements?" Rebecca asked. "Not at all," Dr. Wilson assured her. "Everything is proceeding smoothly. I wanted to share something with you that won't be included in the public exhibition, at least not initially." From his weathered leather briefcase, he withdrew a folder marked with a confidential stamp that had been crossed out and replaced with declassified in red letters. "These documents were recently discovered in a separate archive during our expanded research into Protocol Avalanche," Dr. Wilson explained. "They concern the original decision to establish the facility beneath your barn." Rebecca opened the folder to find a 1957 memorandum discussing potential locations for distributed command nodes in western Pennsylvania. The document evaluated several properties before recommending the acquisition of what would become her land. A handwritten note in the margin caught her attention. "Miller property ideal, remote but accessible, natural depression for concealed excavation, owner willing to sell due to financial difficulties." "Miller?" Rebecca looked up in surprise. "But my property was listed as previously owned by Harold Jenkins, who bought it from a government shell corporation in the 1970s. Dr. Wilson nodded. "That's what the public records show. But these internal documents tell a different story. Before the government acquired it through Westland Agricultural Holdings, the property belonged to the Miller family for 3 generations." "I don't understand," Rebecca said, though a strange suspicion was beginning to form. "Why would this be kept separate from the main exhibition?" The historian hesitated. "Because of what we discovered about the property's subsequent ownership chain, including how it eventually came to you." He turned several pages in the folder, revealing property transfer records and what appeared to be internal intelligence. Memoranda. After Protocol Avalanche was terminated, the property was sold to Harold Jenkins, who had no knowledge of the underground facility. When Jenkins died without heirs in 2008, the property went through several ownership changes before being listed for sale at a significantly reduced price, the price you paid. "It was in foreclosure," Rebecca remembered. "The real estate agent said the bank was motivated to sell quickly." "The bank was indeed motivated," Dr. Wilson confirmed, "but not for the reasons you were told." He pointed to a document dated just 3 months before Rebecca purchased the property. This internal assessment from the Defense Department's Historical Review Division noted that the underwater facility at your location had never been properly decommissioned or secured. They recommended acquiring the property through third parties to conduct a quiet inspection and removal of any remaining sensitive materials. Rebecca felt a chill despite the workshop's warmth. "Are you saying the government deliberately arranged for me to buy that property?" "Not exactly," Dr. Wilson clarified. "They had initiated the process to acquire it discreetly when you submitted your offer directly to the bank. Internal discussions ensued about whether to outbid you, but ultimately they decided against it for reasons specified here." He turned to the final page in the folder. The document was a brief assessment signed by a name Rebecca recognized, Colonel Diana Martinez, though with a lower rank at that time. It read, "Subject Collins represents ideal civilian cover for property. Single mother, limited financial resources, focused on renovation rather than extensive grounds work." Recommend allowing purchase to proceed while maintaining discreet monitoring for any signs of discovery. Consider direct intervention only if underground access is detected. Rebecca set the folder down, her hands trembling slightly. They were watching me from the beginning. The barn collapse didn't reveal something they'd forgotten about. They were waiting for it to happen. Dr. Wilson nodded solemnly. It appears so. When Protocol Avalanche was hastily terminated in 1964, many records were intentionally separated or destroyed. The current generation of intelligence officials knew there had been a facility on your property, but lacked complete information about what it contained or its exact location beneath the barn. So when the barn collapsed and we found the entrance, it provided the perfect opportunity to recover the materials while maintaining the appearance of a surprising historical discovery rather than a planned intelligence operation. Dr. Wilson adjusted his glasses. I want to be clear, Ms. Collins. I had no knowledge of this background when I first visited your property. I was brought in as a legitimate historian to assess the documents, though Colonel Martinez obviously knew more about the situation than she initially revealed. Rebecca tried to process this revelation. Why are you telling me this now? Won't this create problems for the exhibition? This information has been declassified separately and will eventually be incorporated into the historical record. Dr. Wilson explained, I felt you deserved to know the full truth before the public ceremonies, to understand that while your discovery was genuine from your perspective, certain aspects of how it unfolded were influenced. Does Colonel Martinez know you're sharing this with me? The historian's slight smile suggested a rebellious streak beneath his academic demeanor. Let's just say I exercised my prerogative as chief historical consultant to ensure complete accuracy in the record. The Colonel and I have had some spirited discussions about the appropriate boundaries of historical disclosure. Rebecca sat silently for several moments, absorbing this new layer of complexity. Everything she had experienced, buying the property, renovating the barn, discovering the underground facility, had been genuine from her perspective. Yet behind the scenes, unseen hands had been quietly influencing events, waiting for the moment when history would resurface. I'm not sure how to feel about this, she admitted finally. That's entirely understandable, Dr. Wilson said gently. If it helps, I believe your role in this historical process remains genuinely important. The government may have been monitoring the property, but they never anticipated the discovery of Captain Mercer's hidden documentation at the secondary site. Your actions, following up on the anonymous letter, contacting me directly rather than Colonel Martinez, ensured these materials received proper historical attention rather than disappearing into classified archives. Do you know who sent that letter? Rebecca asked. It was a question that had lingered in her mind for months. Dr. Wilson hesitated. We've developed a theory, though it can't be definitively proven. We believe the letter came from someone within the Pentagon's Historical Review Division who was concerned that certain aspects of Protocol Avalanche would remain classified indefinitely if the materials were processed exclusively through military channels. Someone who wanted to make sure I found the secondary site before the Pentagon team did, Rebecca realized. Precisely. By directing you to Captain Mercer's hidden documentation and warning against trusting anyone in uniform, this individual effectively created a civilian discovery path that would be harder to suppress or classify. Dr. Wilson closed the folder. It was, in its way, a continuation of Captain Mercer's own efforts to ensure the historical truth would eventually emerge. After Dr. Wilson departed, Rebecca remained in her workshop, hands automatically continuing their work on the cherry table, while her mind processed the historian's revelations. The barn around her, so thoroughly renovated now, with no visible trace of its dramatic collapse or the secrets it had concealed, suddenly seemed like a metaphor for the layers of history and deception she had unwittingly become part of. The government had been watching her property all along, waiting for the moment when the decrepit barn might reveal its secrets. Yet, something had gone awry in their careful planning. The discovery of the secondary facility and Captain Mercer's hidden testimony, that unexpected element, had apparently forced a more comprehensive disclosure than originally intended. She wondered who else had known. Had Frank suspected more than he revealed? Had Colonel Martinez been managing her as an unwitting asset rather than genuinely responding to an unexpected discovery? The boundaries between coincidence, manipulation, and genuine historical process seemed increasingly blurred. By the time Mia returned from school, Rebecca had made a decision. She would proceed with their Washington trip and participate in the exhibition opening as planned. Whatever the behind-the-scenes machinations, Captain Mercer's effort to preserve historical truth deserved recognition, and her own unwitting role in bringing that truth to light remained meaningful, even if it hadn't unfolded exactly as she'd believed. The journey to Washington the following week marked Mia's first visit to the nation's capital, and Rebecca set aside her complicated feelings to ensure her daughter's experience was positive. They visited the major monuments and museums, with Mia particularly captivated by the original Declaration of Independence and Constitution at the National Archives, documents that had established the very principles of civilian authority that Protocol Avalanche had threatened. The preview of the Avalanche exhibition exceeded even Rebecca's expectations. The National Archives had created an immersive experience that placed visitors inside the tense timeline of the Cuban Missile Crisis, using recently declassified materials to illustrate how close the world had come to nuclear conflict, not just from official policies, but from unauthorized contingency plans like Protocol Avalanche. Captain Mercer's letter formed the emotional center of the exhibition, displayed alongside photographs of the Pinecrest facility and the Westland property secondary site. A special interactive station allowed visitors to explore the complex chain of command issues raised by Protocol Avalanche, highlighting the constitutional questions it presented about civilian control of nuclear weapons. Dr. Wilson personally guided their tour, explaining to an enthralled Mia how historians authenticated and contextualized these materials. "Your mother's discovery changed how we understand this critical period," he told her. "Sometimes ordinary citizens contribute to historical knowledge in extraordinary ways." The day of the official opening ceremony arrived with unexpected media attention. Several major newspapers and television networks had picked up on the barn renovation that rewrote Cold War history angle, and Rebecca found herself fielding interview requests that Dr. Wilson helped her navigate with professional discretion. The ceremony itself was more elaborate than Rebecca had anticipated. The archivist of the United States opened the proceedings with remarks about the importance of historical transparency, followed by Dr. Wilson's detailed explanation of the document's significance. Representatives from several historical associations and national security study centers offered perspectives on how the Avalanche revelations would influence scholarship going forward. When Rebecca was invited to the podium, she found herself facing a room filled with historians, government officials, and media representatives. Despite her nervousness, she spoke briefly about her experience, emphasizing Captain Mercer's courage in preserving these records and the importance of civilians remaining engaged with their nation's history. "I'm just someone who wanted to renovate a barn," she concluded, earning appreciative laughter from the audience. But through that simple project, I've gained a profound appreciation for the vigilance required to maintain our democratic principles and for the individuals throughout our history who took personal risks to protect those principles, even when doing so was difficult or dangerous. The private reception that followed brought another surprise. Rather than the brief handshake and photo opportunity Rebecca had expected, the Secretary of Defense engaged her in a substantive conversation about her discovery, asking thoughtful questions about her experience and her perspective on how these materials should be presented to the public. Captain Mercer's actions represented the highest ideals of military service, the Secretary told her. He understood that his oath to support and defend the Constitution sometimes required difficult moral choices. Your role in bringing his testimony to light completes a historical circle in a way that's actually quite profound. As the reception continued, Rebecca noticed Frank in quiet conversation with Colonel Martinez near one of the exhibition displays. Their interaction seemed surprisingly cordial, given the circumstances, and Rebecca wondered again how much Frank had suspected about the government's interest in her property. Later that evening, after Mia had fallen asleep in their hotel room, Rebecca stepped onto the balcony overlooking the illuminated monuments of Washington. The Washington Monument and Capitol Dome glowed against the night sky, symbols of the democratic institutions that Protocol Avalanche had threatened to circumvent. A soft knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. She opened it to find Frank standing in the hallway. "I thought you might still be up," he said. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" On the balcony, they stood in companionable silence before. Frank spoke again. "You handled yourself impressively today. Captain Mercer would have been proud to know you were the one who found his testimony." "Did you know?" Rebecca asked directly. "About the government monitoring my property before the barn collapsed?" Frank's expression revealed nothing. "I had suspicions after our first meeting with Colonel Martinez, but no confirmation until recently." He paused. "Dr. Wilson shared the declassified ownership history with you, I take it?" Rebecca nodded. "It changes how I feel about everything that happened. Makes me wonder how much was real and how much was manipulated." "Your discovery was genuine," Frank assured her. "Your response to it was genuine. Those are the parts that matter historically." And the anonymous letter directing us to the secondary site? Dr. Wilson thinks it came from someone inside the Pentagon who wanted civilian discovery of those materials. Frank smiled slightly. "That's certainly a plausible theory. There are often individuals within government institutions who believe the public deserves more information than official channels might provide." Something in his tone made Rebecca look at him more carefully. "Frank, did you have something to do with that letter?" The former intelligence officer gazed out at the monument-dotted landscape before responding. "Let's just say that throughout my career, I developed a keen appreciation for the importance of civilian oversight in matters of national security, and sometimes ensuring that oversight requires unconventional channels of information." Rebecca stared at him, pieces suddenly falling into place. "You knew about Protocol Avalanche before we ever found anything, didn't you? That's why you were so interested in helping with my barn renovation." Frank neither confirmed nor denied this directly. "I've lived in Pinecrest for 15 years, Becky. When a single mother buys a property with a known but unacknowledged intelligence, history then starts renovating the very structure concealing that history," he shrugged. "Let's say it coincided with certain historical documentation interests I developed during my intelligence career. So you befriended me to monitor the property?" Rebecca felt a complex mixture of betrayal and understanding. "I befriended you because you and Mia are good people who became my neighbors," Frank corrected gently. The historical possibilities were secondary, though admittedly interesting to someone with my background. And when the barn collapsed and we found the entrance, that was genuine serendipity, Frank assured her, though once it happened, I may have helped ensure the historical significance received appropriate attention rather than disappearing into classified archives. Rebecca processed this revelation, finding that her sense of betrayal was fading. Whatever Frank's initial motivations, his friendship had proven genuine throughout their unexpected historical adventure, and if he had indeed been the anonymous letter's author, he had helped ensure that Captain Mercer's effort to preserve the truth hadn't been in vain. "So, what happens now?" she asked finally. "We go back to Pinecrest and pretend none of this happened. Return to renovating furniture and rebuilding our lives." "With one significant difference," Frank replied. "You now own a historic property with a fully renovated workshop and a compelling story behind it. That creates interesting possibilities for your business and Mia's education." He smiled. "History has a way of enriching our present when we embrace it rather than trying to bury it." As they stood looking out at the symbolic heart of American democracy, Rebecca realized that Frank was right. The unexpected journey from barn renovation to historical revelation had changed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Captain Mercer had risked his career to preserve the truth for future generations. The mysterious letter writer, whether Frank or someone else, had ensured that truth reached public awareness. And Rebecca's own choices had helped complete a historical circle that began during the tensest days of the Cold War. "I still can't believe renovating an old barn for $1,200 led to all this," she said, gesturing toward the National Archives where the exhibition was now officially open. "History often hinges on small actions by ordinary people," Frank observed. "Captain Mercer understood that. I think you do too." The next morning, as they prepared to return to Pinecrest, Rebecca received one final surprise. A handwritten note from Dr. Wilson delivered to their hotel. "Dear Ms. Collins, before you depart Washington, I wanted to share one last historical note that seems appropriate given your journey. The property you now own, before it became a Cold War intelligence site, before it was purchased by the government, belonged to the Miller family from 1887 until 1957. The final owner, Thomas Miller, reluctantly sold the farm due to financial difficulties, unaware of the government's interest in establishing a secret facility there. Records indicate he had a daughter named Rebecca, who never knew the family had once owned that land. Perhaps it's mere coincidence that another Rebecca now stewards this historically significant property. Or perhaps, as some historians might suggest, history sometimes finds its own path to completion. Safe travels home, and thank you for your service to historical truth. Sincerely, Harold Wilson." Rebecca stared at the note, a strange sense of connection washing over her. Whether coincidence or some more meaningful historical symmetry, the revelation that another Rebecca had once been connected to her land felt like the closing of a circle begun long before Protocol Avalanche, Captain Mercer, or her own barn renovation project. As their train departed Washington, carrying them back to Pinecrest and whatever future awaited, Rebecca gazed out the window at the passing landscape. The land beneath it had witnessed centuries of history, personal and national, secret and public, layer upon layer of stories waiting to be discovered by those willing to look beneath the surface. Her simple renovation project had unexpectedly connected her to one such story, changing her understanding of history and her place within it. Whatever came next, she would approach it with the same determination that had led her to save for that barn renovation in the first place, one careful step at a time, building something lasting for herself and for Mia. The barn waited for them back in Pinecrest, not just a workshop now, but a testament to hidden history revealed and acknowledged. Within its renovated walls, Rebecca would continue creating and restoring beautiful things, adding her own layer to the ongoing story of a place that had witnessed more history than anyone had suspected. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.